Good morning. My name is Haven Davis, and today I'll be talking about gluttony in modern Protestant American churches. In the year 1734, Benjamin Franklin wrote in his book, Poor Richard's Almanac, "In general, mankind, since the improvement of cookery, eats twice as much as nature requires." This concept has not only remained true, but vastly escalated in modern-day America. From endless buffets to viral videos of a person indulging in absurd quantities of food called mukbangs, American culture has both continued to glorify and normalize this overconsumption of food. The acceptance of consuming calories, even after the feeling of fullness, in order to please oneself has become normalized. The American church must do better at combating this normalization. Gluttony has become a taboo topic in the church and has been under-addressed. Although this may not be the intent of the church, the lack of educating members about gluttony shows the ignorance and acceptance the church has developed. Gluttony is not simply about overeating. Rather, it is about allowing food to take priority over God. The indulgence of food may initially be able to appear harmless, but has the ability to sneak into one's life and captivate it. The greatest threats are able to disguise themselves as desirable, and once one realizes the danger, it is usually too late. One example of this is the Greek ancient tale of the Trojan horse. The story begins with Paris, the prince of Troy. Paris is given a promise from Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, that he shall marry Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. However, Helen is already married to Menelaus, the Greek king of Sparta. So Paris visits Sparta and steals Helen away from Menelaus. As a result of this, Menelaus gathers his army and lays siege to Troy for 10 years. The continuous fighting finally comes to an end when the Greeks and Odysseus devise a deceptive plan. Odysseus decided that the way to win the war would be to create a seemingly innocent gift, a Trojan horse. They created a giant horse made out of wood, and inside, the Greeks filled it with strong and resilient fighters. They left this presumed gift outside the gates of Troy. The Trojans, ignorantly thinking they had won, brought this gift inside their walls and celebrated their victory. As night falls, the Greeks inside the horse sneak out and open the gates of Troy for the rest of their army. Soldiers are killed, women and children are taken captive. The city is destroyed. Troy is in ruins. The leaders of Troy naively allowed this flamboyant gift inside their walls, ignoring its true intentions, leaving the city destroyed. Leaders of the church have allowed gluttony to become their own Trojan horse. Gluttony may seem like a lesser sin that might not need to be addressed, but in reality, the addictive nature of food leads to further consequences that can take over one's life. Therefore, the church must instruct the congregation on the topic of gluttony to help prevent the continuous rise in overeating in America. Why is gluttony a sin? Gluttony is the desire for more. It is the act of being unsatisfied with one's needs, allowing it to be a form of greed. It is failing to have discipline and self-control and placing focus on temporary earthly desires. As Proverbs 25:28 states, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. Christians are called to practice self-control in every aspect of their earthly bodies. This includes a person's pride, anger, lust, and anything that is able to consume one's mind. Furthermore, gluttony is a gateway sin, allowing what people may see as bigger sins to begin. This is because when a glutton gives in to their wants, they lack the discipline it takes to deny their earthly desires. It encourages indulgence and mindless thinking. Therefore, it is inviting a lack of self-control into something as common as food, allowing it to possibly lead to the several other aspects Christians are called to practice self-control. Gluttony is defined as overconsumption, specifically but not limited to food, to the point of idolization, which means it takes priority over God. Obesity is the excessive fat accumulation that presents a risk to one's health. Gluttony and obesity have found their way to acceptance within the American church, which comprises of several different denominations that hold the most significant presence in the United States of America. In a world where personal comfort has become glorified, eating has become mindless, and overindulging normalized, the American church has succumbed to ignoring gluttony rather than being a guide to Christians. Francine Prose, a critically acclaimed American novelist, addresses gluttony and both what it is and why it's an issue by examining the true meaning of the sin, while referencing great classical writers such as St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and Dante. Women and men all over America suffer from extreme cases of eating disorders, such as anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. Teresa Houghton, an average American citizen, is one of these women. Teresa is a woman in her mid-20s who is suffering an internal battle between food and herself. Anywhere she went, she was greeted by food, whether that be from endless buffets, all-you-can-eat potlucks, and viral mukbangs. She felt she had no escape. Sadly for Teresa, the church was no different. When Teresa attended church, she was not surrounded by the support and encouragement she needed. Instead, Teresa was surrounded by food. She explains how there seemed to be an unspoken rule that church gatherings, in particular, required something to eat. Teresa observed the need of the congregation to have food at every event. When Teresa mentioned her struggle with food to members told her how she cannot just ask them not to bring food to events. While it's understandable for members of a church to want to bring food to congregational events, accommodations should be made to make sure that the purpose of church is on God, not food. Church is the one place Teresa should have felt safe from America's overconsumption of food. It is clear from Teresa's experience in her church that the church's focus was on food, not God, neglecting true fellowship and shifting focus towards food instead of God. The Bible instructs us to take care of the bodies God gave us and to not view food as our God. This is found in 1 Corinthians 6:19-20, as it states, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you received from God? You are not your own. You are bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." In Philippians 3:19, we are strongly warned about enemies of the cross, as it states, "Their destiny is destruction. Their God is their stomach. Their glory is their shame. Their mind is set on earthly things." If the Bible itself warns about the dangers of gluttony and compels us to take care of our bodies, why would we not discuss this in church? The church has an obligation to talk about gluttony due to its prevalence in America as well as in the church, and the fatal consequences that occur. Prose, the author of the book, says to identify the sin and the sinner, it becomes obvious that though gluttony may be the least harmful of sins, it might as well be the most widespread. Obesity rates in America have skyrocketed in the last 10 years. According to the National Institutes of Health, nearly 1 in 3 adults is overweight. More than 2 in 5 adults are considered obese. About 1 in 6 children and adolescents ranging from ages 2 to 19 are overweight. About 1 in 6 children and adolescents ranging from ages 2 to 19 are considered obese. These statistics should prompt an urgent response. The number of annual deaths linked to obesity is 280,000. Americans are indeed literally eating themselves to death. There must be a change to prevent the continuous rise in obesity rates. The change should begin with the church. As of now, the church has blatantly failed at decreasing obesity rates. In fact, studies have proven that Protestant churchgoers are 50% more likely to struggle with obesity than non-churchgoers. Why would the church not view gluttony as a crucial sin to address if they are the prime examples of America's overconsumption of food? These results show that gluttony is in fact not harmless. A supposed harmless sin has actually led the sinner to critical health conditions, and in some cases, death. The church has an obligation to talk about gluttony due to its rising popularity amongst Christians. In his Divine Comedy, Dante writes the need to not only know the right choices, but to desire the right choices, as he argues that righteousness is wanting what is good, not merely knowing what goodness is. If a knowledge of goodness is not married to a desire for righteousness, mere knowledge profits a man nothing. Leaders of the church should be equipped to discuss the topic of gluttony in depth and should feel obligated to share the knowledge they have gained with fellow Christians. If respected authors such as St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and Dante can address this intricate sin, why do modern-day churches shy away from it? Gluttony has consumed America, and the church must address it. Some may wonder if gluttony is truly an extreme enough problem in America that the church must address it. We'll be shocked to learn how gluttonous our culture has become. One of Francine Prose's defining characteristics in her book is too much. This is one of the most prevalent in America. The average recommended calorie intake to maintain a healthy diet for adults is 2,000 to 2,500 calories. On average, Americans are eating nearly 3,864 calories a day, which is over 1,000 more calories than what is recommended for a healthy diet. If you multiply the average calorie intake by the number of days in a year, which is 365 days, by the number of the American population, which is around 300 million people, it will give you the total amount estimated of calories that Americans are consuming in a year. 4.9 trillion. This outstanding number shows the overall consumption problem with which America has continued to struggle. America not only overconsumes when it comes to food, but also overspends. This adds to another point Post provides: too expensively. On average, America spends nearly $2.63 trillion a year on food alone. The average American citizen spends around $10,000 a year on food alone. The amount of focus Americans have placed on food has created an idolization. The church has not been indifferent to this idolization, but contributes to it, as we see the need to bring food to congregational events. This is prevalent in church potlucks, Sunday school, and even morning breakfasts. Furthermore, as we previously stated, Protestant churchgoers are 50% more likely to struggle with obesity than non-churchgoers. The idolatry of food has consumed America. There must be a change in both American culture as well as in the church. This starts with addressing it amongst their congregation. Food itself is not inherently bad. In fact, without food, the human body would be unable to proper functionally. Food brings people together from different cultures, religions, and communities. It is not wrong or sinful to bring food to congregational events. Even the Bible emphasizes how food allows for fellowship. As it states in Acts, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, to the breaking of bread and prayers. However, the problem of gluttony is not food itself, but the amount of focus an individual places on food, making it an idol. If the church is going to utilize food in order to create a community, they must also learn to address the negative aspects food can cause on an individual due to the obvious overconsumption America has. The church must learn to address the abuse of food as a serious sin. The church has been able to create an inviting community to non-believers using food. One example of this is from a testimony of a lady named Ida. Ida was a refugee who was living as a single parent to her son. She had lost everything and was hopeless. A nearby church was distributing supplies to those in need. Ida and her son were desperate and on the verge of starvation, so they decided to visit the church for supplies. For 18 months, Ida continued to visit the church for supplies. However, Ida refused to listen to any of the sermons, going as far as plugging her fingers with her ears. Finally, Ida stopped going to the sermons altogether. One day, Ida was gathering supplies for herself and her son, and she began to listen to the sermon being preached on the screen. The sermon was about grace and blessings, and as Ida heard this, she felt completely changed. Shortly after, Ida gave her life to Christ and began to serve her church. This story reveals the true nature of how food can be used positively for church outreach. Ida's story is not gluttony. However, pastors must learn to address the negative aspects food can cause on an individual due to the drug-like effect food can cause, making it extremely addictive and detrimentally affect a person's health. However, pastors justify avoiding, even ignoring the sin due to the potential discomfort it may bring to the congregation. The Bible encourages fellowship with food through its text. For example, in Acts it states, "And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts." Clearly, using food for community is needed amongst church members. However, modern-day churches have misused this idea of food fellowship, as well as neglect that Christians were made with a purpose. All that we do is meant to reflect Christ, as it states in 1 Corinthians 10:31. "So whether you eat, or whether you drink, or whatever you do all for the glory of God." A modern example of this misuse is from a church in Canton, Ohio, called First Christian Church, FCC. FCC uploaded a post to Facebook on July 5th, 2024. The headline of this post was FCC's inaugural 4th of July hot dog eating contest, a battle of the ministries. This post was of several different pastors participating in a competition to see who can consume the most amount of hot dogs the fastest. This is extremely controversial as well as misleading. While some may see this as a fun tradition or an amusing event, the overall appearance of this event is leaders of a ministry demonstrating their ignorance to sin. A competition where pastors overconsume hot dogs has nothing to do with ministry or outreach. It is simply gluttony. There are examples of churches using food for positive outreach. However, there are also severely misguided uses of food in American churches. This is why the pastors and the church must address the overconsumption of food as a serious sin. One reason for this tolerance that American churches have developed is the overall fear of offending the sinner. Pastors have grown extremely cautious on their preaching on social and moral issues. Barna, a private organization group, led a research study over 4 years on whether or not pastors feel limited on their preaching on social and moral issues. The results explain how half of Christian pastors say they frequently, 11%, or occasionally, 39%, feel limited on their preaching on social and moral issues. The results explain this is a rational worry pastors might have, as 85% of the American public believes fat shaming is a problem and 48% believe it's a serious problem. No pastor wants to be responsible for offending someone, especially if it may deter a potential believer or believer from the Christian faith. However, this directly interferes with the main purpose of church that God commands, teaching. In Romans 15:14, it states that you yourselves are full of goodness, that you're filled with knowledge and able to instruct with one another. God intended his creation to join with one another and learn about him. When a pastor avoids a certain sin in order to preserve the feelings of a fellow churchgoer, it is giving into the ways of the world, failing to be in the world and not of the world. While it's important for a pastor's sermon to be delivered appropriately, it is equally, if not more important, to preach on all aspects of the Bible, especially gluttony, due to America's obvious overconsumption problem. According to Britannica, gluttony is defined as excess in eating and drinking. While drinking, over-consuming alcohol is seen as a misconduct, when has overeating ever been seen as a condemnable act? USA Today covers a story about a pastor who was removed from a position for being an alcoholic. Perry Noble was the founder of a church in South Carolina called New Spring Church. Noble was removed from a position on July 1st, 2016 for being an alcoholic. Noble was justly removed from his position as pastor. However, would the same thing have happened to Noble if the substance he was over-consuming was food instead of alcohol? No. There is no distinct case of a pastor ever being removed from his position for being a glutton for food. Overeating food is just as bad as over-consuming alcohol. So why is only one being condemned in the church? Obesity and alcoholism may both lead to diabetes as well as cancer. Furthermore, in Proverbs 23:20-21, it states, "Be not among drunkards or gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags." If over-consuming food is just as bad as over-consuming alcohol, why is only one being condemned in the church? Gluttony has consumed America. The church has blatantly failed at being indifferent to this overconsumption. Gluttony is a sin and should be presented as one in the church. Pastors in the church must learn to confront the sin to ensure that the dangers of the sin do not continue to rise. They must learn from the Trojans' mistakes and not be ignorant to a sin simply because it may be acceptable and appealing in today's society. Worldly views should not set the standard for the church. It should be the other way around. The church should guide Christians through life and instruct them through the Bible. If the church begins to do this, it will reflect in society. Christians are meant to lead by example, as it states in 1 Timothy 4:12. "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers as an example, in speech, in conduct, in faith, in love, in purity." Thank you. Really? I would now like to take questions from the judges.
Haven, you did a great job. Lovely. Okay, I want to tell you why we spend so much on groceries. They cost too much.
True.
Okay. So you did a great job. And while you were giving your analogy about the Trojan horse, I kept thinking about the passage in the Bible that says a person without self-control is like a city whose walls are broken down. You gave a lot of generalizations about how the church needs to help. Let's say somebody said, Haven, besides the pastor body shaming the congregation, and I also noticed you had a passage in here you didn't get to talk about one pastor saying the reason why they don't address it is because gluttony is a little bit more obvious of a sin to the naked eye than some others. But what are some things a church can actually do besides just preaching about it from the pulpit?
That's a very good question. So I think a big thing that we can do is like spread awareness is the main thing I would say. I think it just isn't talked about. So I get what you're saying, like there's other things we can do, but I do think that the main thing the church can do is actually address it. But besides that, I think like food, it's not bad to eat with one another in church, and I think it should be encouraged. And I don't think you should shame one another for eating. But I think if you like notice your friend, I guess, who's struggling with it, there's a way to appropriately confront someone about that. And that's not judging or shaming someone. It's just confronting someone, and there's a difference.
Haven, you actually have some pictures that I think would help explain what exactly you are addressing.
Yeah, so this is a mukbang, and it's basically this thing on like Instagram and TikTok where people just overconsume food just for the fun of it, because like it's just things people do. And then that's just an example of like how food is used in the church, and that's just a picture of food.
Let me be transparent about my own life. There have been seasons of life when I didn't have 4 kids, some in diapers and one being 5, that I was much thinner, and and then I would gain weight, and I'd try to lose it again by being healthier. And one of the struggles that I have had in these seasons is when I go online and I try to find what are the standards that I should be pursuing, they seem incredibly unreasonable.
Yeah.
Like in order for me to get my BMI below the level that is published online as healthy, I would have to lose like 70 pounds. I would be as skinny as a pencil. And so that feels defeating. So I agree with your assessment that we are ignoring a gluttony problem. But when I've tried to deal with it in my own life, I've just been defeated by ridiculous standards, some of which just come, arbitrarily from a government or so. I guess what would you say as a church, what standards should we be going by?
Well, I think something I should clarify is that I'm not talking about like the way a person looks necessarily. I'm talking about gluttony itself, and
Sure.
gluttony is
That's a good
over-consuming
distinction.
food.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about a person necessarily being overweight. I talk about in my paper, I just didn't address this in my presentation, that obesity and like being overweight is an indicator, but it's not the only way a person can be a glutton. I also have a story in there about a male model who was over-consuming food, and he was skinny and fit, but he was still struggling with gluttony. So that's how I would
So
start that.
he was purging his food in some way?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's a very helpful distinction. Thank you.
It reminds me in the screw tape letters,
Yes.
he talks about the patient's mother being gluttonous because she
Yes.
likes her toast cooked just a certain way and her tea a certain temperature, and that makes her gluttonous. So.
And actually, in my primary source, Gluttony by Francine Prose, she actually talks about that.
Yeah.
And she gives multiple examples of what gluttony is constituted as. And particular is also a form of gluttony in her opinion.
Yeah. I guess my question is this: is this a new issue? I mean, is it different? Is this a new issue? And if not, how is it different now than maybe in other points of history?
So back in history, being a glutton, like being overweight or being anything having to do with fat, it was very much praised. It was a sign that you were rich and like wealthy, which is also another form of sin that could be pride or just greed in general. So that kind of goes back to my point that I think gluttony leads to a ton of other sins. But I don't think it's a new issue that we're having. But I think America's scale in which we're doing it has just normalized it to an over amount.
You did a great job, Haven. Two questions I have. So you mentioned gluttony as a Trojan horse. I'm curious how it's a Trojan horse. What's it leading to that's worse than even gluttony, if that makes sense?
So I think that it's a Trojan horse because it's fun to eat. Like everyone enjoys food. Like that's a normal part. And it's not wrong to enjoy food. But I would say it's a thing because food, it's not bad. But whenever you let food inside yourself or like partake in food, it encourages other things. And also if you overindulge in it, it can like hurt your body itself, just like the Trojans let this horse inside their walls and it destroyed their city.
Appreciate that. And then you mentioned Dante. I appreciate the reference to Dante. More than knowing what's right is the virtue is desiring what's right. But it seems like gluttony is a complex reality because we desire food because it's a gift of God. And so how do we learn to desire healthy eating as opposed to gluttonous. Really.
Well, me referencing that was more about pastors' obligation to talk about gluttony to members of the church. That wasn't necessarily me referencing like desiring good food, which you should desire, but that's not like that's someone's own personal conviction, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I guess it's my turn. So you and I both can agree that obesity is a far more pressing issue, but I think we can't leave out the issue of underconsumption
Yes.
as well, and how the church should address anorexia or underconsumption and that being an idol.
Yes.
How would you suggest the church balance the two between overconsumption and underconsumption in helping their congregation navigate?
That's a very good question. Like some of my classmates even brought up the fact that like, do I consider undereating a sin or like to be gluttony? And I wouldn't say undereating is gluttony. I would consider it its own form of idol because gluttony is specifically about over-consuming food, not under-consuming it, but I do think it's its own idol. And I think both are very important to address in the church. And I think that the way that like churches can like progress in that is like even talking about in Sunday school with like their one-on-off groups, because for girls I know it's a big deal, for undereating is a big thing. And so I think it'd be very helpful if like a woman in the church went to younger girls and just talked to them about that issue in a loving and supportive way, and both on the opposite end with gluttony, like you do everything you do in a loving way.
Can you say you've touched on this several times
Yes.
actually, but I just kind of pulling it together
Yeah.
here. Can you touch some more on why this is a taboo topic?
Yes.
That struck me when you said it right at the very beginning. This is a taboo topic. Like, why is this so taboo in the church from your?
I think this conversation makes people uncomfortable in a lot of ways, and I think it's even uncomfortable for a pastor because not all pastors do have the most like put together selves, if that makes sense. That's me saying it in a nice way, so I'm gonna say it like that. And
Thank you for your politeness.
yes, and so I think it's very uncomfortable for a pastor to preach on a sin they also struggle with. And like pastors are held to a higher standard in the church, so I think it would be uncomfortable for me to even talk about it. Like it's just an uncomfortable situation because it's so normalized in America too, and also just like the self-love community and like people, it offends people to talk about being overweight and being obese. You're welcome.
Hey, but let's talk about this next slide that you have.
Yes.
It's the U.S. adult obesity rate. Tell us why you chose this as part of your presentation.
I really chose this just to highlight the extensiveness of like how much America is over-consuming food. Especially, this is my favorite one because it really shows the dramatic increase. And also, notice what state is like the darkest. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh no.
But
Oh no.
yes.
Why do you think there was such an increase from 2012 to 2022?
Part of it, I would say maybe COVID, just because everyone's like stuck in their house. There's not as many ways to
Right.
like, there's only really food to like do, you
Keep
know?
us entertained.
Yeah.
People learn to bake bread.
Yes. And that's not wrong.
No, it's not. It's like Paul says.
Yes.
Everything is permissible, but
Mhm.
not everything is beneficial.
So true. Does anyone have a question in the crowd? Yes, Ms. Claire?
So, in America, I think in Louisiana, it's 1 in 5. I think nationally, it's somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 children struggle with food insecurity or not
Yes.
having enough, which is staggering when you look at obesity rates
Mhm.
and how obesity rates are rising. How can the church strike a balance? Because I can't help but wonder that the reason every time a church door is open, there's food, is because those numbers exist.
Yeah.
So what is it? Do you have any ideas how a church could balance that?
Yes.
And what that would look like?
So I don't think it's wrong to bring food to congregational events, and I say that in my presentation. I think when you do competitions such as like a hot dog eating contest, I just don't think there's a need for that in the church. But I think with Ida, like she was able to learn about God because there was food where she was going, and that should happen. Like that should be happening more actually. But I think especially in like youth ministry, I would say like a lot of youth events are centered around competitions with food, And I don't think that should be happening because it also confuses a kid, especially if you're in middle school and you don't really know how to navigate food correctly. And if you go to events where we're just over consuming food for no reason, that's just not really needed. But I think if you do it in a positive way where like you're joining with one another and learning about God and feasting and like with God, if that makes sense, that's needed, if that answers your question. Yes?
Hi, I don't, excuse me, I don't think many people sit down for a meal with the goal of trying to see how much can they eat. But still, gluttony is a problem and it sneaks up on a lot of people over a long period of time. Do you have any practical tips or helpful thoughts that someone could have as they're trying to work through this and not be gluttonous?
Yeah. So I think that's a very hard question to answer just because the feeling of fullness, it's subjective really to the person. And so I would just say when you feel full, stop. Like that's the best advice I can give because it's important to like properly fuel your body, but you should know whenever you're full, like, which that can be easier said than done, especially with like things like Ozempic that suppress that. That's a very confusing area, if that makes sense. Yes, Sarah?
So, like, in later generations, not so much before, but there was this idea growing up that, like, you couldn't leave the dinner table until you finish all your food.
Yeah.
Even if you were full.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you think the idea of, like, how we raise our children around food is important, and we should, maybe we should teach our children to recognize that?
That's actually a very good point, and I agree. I think that is a very interesting thing to teach your children to like finish your plate food. I get the idea behind it because you don't want to be wasteful, but like if a child's full and you're continuing to make them eat, it's teaching them bad habits. It's actually teaching them gluttony. So that's what I would say to that.
Haven, you're the perfect example of someone who chose a topic early on and knew exactly what you wanted to research the whole time. And look, you enjoyed the year because of what you chose. So good job sticking to what you wanted to do, and you've done a beautiful presentation. Very good.